Welcome back to the Nose Plays. Today we're going to be talking about what the Nose knows about the combat system in Endless Space 2. Now, the combat system has been classified by many people as a glorified game of rock, paper, scissors, and while there is some truth to that, it's an incredibly complex and deep system within the game, and one that can be very frustrating if you don't understand some of the details and some of the basics about how the system works. So we'll be looking into that in detail today. But before we can do that, since we are playing the Vaulters, because they're my favorite faction, we need to pick a system. So I've already kind of looked at our starting opportunities. This looks promising. This looks interesting with 5 planets in it. But this system actually is going to be the one that we're going to colonize. And the reason that we're going to colonize this system above the others is because I can get there in one turn. And as we have discovered, I guess I can get here in one turn as well. As we have discovered, the faster you can start your first colony, the faster you can get your second colony up and running in most cases. The other reason we're going to start here is because the titanium resource, which is the most important resource for the Vaulters, and also the fact that this is a subterranean curiosity means that there's a very high chance that this is Hyperion. Anytime you see a planet with 2 subterraneans, there's a very good likelihood that you're going to get one of each type of the strategics, the tier 1 strategics. Sometimes it's a luxury resource deposit, so sometimes you get something like Jadonics, which is also pretty good. But that's why we're going to go ahead and start here. So we're going to go ahead and colonize this system. And we're going to go ahead and start with just queuing up our basic buildings in an order that kind of makes sense. Let's turn that off so we don't have any more interruptions. So this is kind of an important thing, just get your buildings started. One real critical thing that you want to do before you do anything else at this point in the game, when you're playing Vaulters in particular. I've done some research on the hero and the starting out with the hero, and in my experience, if you put the hero on a fleet, you will not be able to put her back on the system for like 8 turns. In my experience, if you start your hero on a system, you can generally get 1 or 2 turns of level 1 progression pretty quickly. So like within the first 6 to 7 turns, you can get her to level 2, get a point into one of her skills and start collecting a turn or 2 earlier than you would normally be able to if you put her on a fleet. However, the downside to that is there's a good chance, depending on the luck of the draw with curiosities and how quickly your ships can get to them, that you might actually be able to get her to level 2 or very close to level 2 by the time you put her on your system. And so my preference is leaning more and more towards putting the hero on the fleet and trying to get her to level 2 before I bring her back. And I'll explain why that is a little bit more later on, if we get to that. But one of the really important things that you need to do is before you search any curiosities, you need to make sure that you put your hero on the fleet, and that way she gets experience for the ones that you search. Otherwise, you're basically going to make it really, really difficult for her to make level 2, let alone level 1, before she has to go back. We also want to check over here. We got 3 curiosities over there in Gallia, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 curiosities in this system. So this will be where we're heading next, and that'll be 7 of our curiosities right off the bat. Now, next thing you always want to do when you're playing Vultures is get the Dirty Hands Act going. That's going to speed up the rate at which you collect system improvements in your first system. Very important. The next thing that you'll want to do is check this deed. If it is the one that we were lucky enough to grab, be the first to search 10 curiosities. You'll have a really, really good chance of being able to do this. And I'm going to show you a couple of tricks to help you do it more successfully. Also, the fact that the reward is 75 titanium makes this even better for us. So this is definitely something we want to pursue as quickly as possible. We want to queue this up for sure because we have titanium in our starting planet, and also because this building is fantastic and we need to get it as quickly as possible. Okay, so the focus of today is going to be on combat. We may not be playing a real game. I might do some things that I normally wouldn't do, but I'll try to point them out when I do. Since we settled our colony, we're going to be given this notification for blue cap mold and jade onyx. These are the population boosters for the 2 starting populations, and they do vary from game to game. You won't always get the same ones, but know that when you colonize with the Argosy for the first time, you'll get those pop-ups, and that's what they're from, is the 2 population boosters for your Vulture and Sister of Mercy factions. Okay, the final thing that I like to do before I end the turn on this very first turn is make sure that I've done everything I need to. So, for instance, we have not searched these curiosities yet. We need to do that. We did put our hero in our fleet before we searched, so that's good. She's going to get some experience for that. And I was right. We were lucky. We got the Hyperium deposit, and it was an average deposit. So that means we're in really good shape. We're going to be collecting 3 titanium and 3 Hyperium almost from the very beginning of the game. And interesting. So we found the Dust Ruins, which is a pretty good anomaly, but we also found the Analytical Engine, which is actually a really decent curiosity, especially since we're going to be focusing on collecting as many curiosities in the early game as possible. This could become quite a profitable little building for us. And in fact, I think, yeah, it shows up here. So it has an upkeep cost of 6. So before you ever want to build this, you'll need to have probably at least 10 to 12 curiosities searched. But it's +1 on system per curiosity ever discovered. So your first 6 basically just net you even. This building is pretty much worthless unless you're getting much more than 6 curiosities searched. But, I mean, throughout the course of a game, you could end up with something like 20 to 30 curiosities, at which point this building's producing about 24 dust per turn, which isn't bad at all. It does take a little bit of industry to get down, though, so it's not something we're going to be really keen on getting up right away, but maybe in the mid to late game it would be something we could use to help boost our dust up if we were starting to have dust problems. Okay, now, the next thing that is really critical to do on this very first turn is we need to upgrade our ships. Per ship, unfortunately, has a default movement speed of 4, and that's just way too slow for what we need. So we're going to have to equip her with something a little bit better. Now, because we're not anticipating any combat, we could potentially pull these off, and that's going to reduce the upkeep cost of this ship, but it's also going to reduce the amount for the upgrade. So the upgrade is 60 if I do this, but if I pull all of these off, it reduces the upgrade cost to 30. And so that's what I want to do. I want to upgrade her ship with a engine to get her movement speed up to 7, and then apply the design. That's only going to cost me 30 dust. It's not bad. Then we're going to do a little cheat thing that I like to do. I don't know if it's really a cheat, but it's definitely an exploit. We're going to go ahead and, because this ship is just ridiculous with the support modules, we're going to equip it with 4 support modules, and we're going to apply that design, pull everything else off of it. Now, before we do the upgrade, we have 2 probes that we have not used yet, so we're going to go ahead and launch those. And I'm going to go ahead and just start. Let's just do a straight vertical. Well, here we go. Let's go vertical, vertical, and then we're going to upgrade for 34 dust. And that's going to restock our entire set of probes, but instead of having 4, we're going to have 8. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch 4 on each side, kind of at a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can see, so this is why it's kind of an exploit. So we're going to, for a small fee of about 60 dust, we're going to be able to uncover a massive amount of what's immediately around us in just a few turns. Now, before we actually end the turn, we're going to do one more thing. We're going to make sure that this ship has a movement speed of 7 as well. And we're going to apply that design. And we can go ahead and we can upgrade it again and get 6 more probes. Now these 6 probes, we can kind of squeeze in between these other ones in a direction that we feel maybe has more open territory. So maybe this way. 1, 2, 3. And I'm only going to use half of my probes because it takes half of the turn to get some of them back. And so this way I should always have 3, give or take. And then we're going to go ahead and queue this one up to move to there. So it's going to take 1, 2, 3 turns. So actually we might as well go ahead and shoot the rest of these off as well, since it's going to take so many turns to get there. We'll see what happens. We're going to get a lot of stuff uncovered. Okay, so now that that's done, and we've kind of started into our game, let's go ahead and create a new ship type, and let's talk a little bit about combat and how combat works within the game. So, one of the very first things that you'll want to do when you're looking at ships and ship designs, you really need to click the detailed stats on. Detailed stats are critical to understanding what's really going on within the game. When you have them turned off, it's not very intuitive as to what's going on, and I'm a little confused as to why they even bothered to have 2 different menus, especially when one of them's so much more confusing than the other. because the one with less information is actually more confusing, to me at least, than the one with more information. And so I much appreciate this menu being in the game. I just kind of wish it was the default menu, to be perfectly honest. And I'll show you why. So let's turn it off for a moment, and let's just kind of mouse over a variety of weapons. So we have 4 basic types of weapons at the start of the game, and there are some different types of weapons that you'll collect throughout the game, but these are the 4 basic ones. So you'll have kinetics, which are just your basic gun modules, slugs. You have torpedoes or missiles. You'll have lasers, and you'll have beam weapons. Lasers and beams are very similar, and slugs and missiles have similar damage types, but they act very differently. If you just mouse over each one, you'll notice the damage per second of slugs is 25, missiles is 28, lasers is 13, and beams is only 9. And you would think, just by mousing over these, that missiles and slugs are by far the superior weapon choices. But you would be really, really, really wrong. I'm just going to throw a gun on here, and there's some information over here at the bottom of this menu that kind of tells you why guns, even though they have a high damage per second stat on their card, are not actually the most efficient weapons in the game. And it has to do with this number, and it's the accuracy of the weapon. And so the battle card is assuming 100% accuracy, while the range that your ship engages actually determines your accuracy. And this modifies this base statistic quite significantly. So for example, if I turn on the detailed stats, you can now see that even at short range, where we have our best accuracy, we're not actually receiving the 25 damage per second that's on the battle card. And this is one of those things that's not super intuitive right away, although you tend to figure it out pretty quickly when you start engaging with other ships and you're wondering why you're just not dealing any damage. It becomes pretty apparent. But it's not up front without having this menu turned on. So if I remove this gun, you can see my damage before we remove it is 2, 12, and 21. Okay? 2, 12, and 21. Now, going back to just looking at the battle card over to the left, damage per second of 25 versus a damage per second of 9, it sounds like this is a no-brainer, like this is the better weapon. But when I equip it, remember, 2, 12, 21 versus 9, 9, 9. So at long range, we're actually doing significantly more damage per second with this weapon than we would be with kinetics. And this is one of the reasons why kinetics look good initially to a lot of players, but turn out to be a very poor weapon choice. If you are engaging at long or medium range, kinetic weapons are pretty terrible or average. At short range, they're terrifying and they're absolutely devastating, but short range is not a very reliable battle tactic. Getting into short range is not very reliable. It's much easier for your opponent to force you to engage at a longer distance than it is for them to likely choose a shorter distance. And if they did choose a shorter distance, it would generally be because they're using the same types of weapons you are, and so your advantage at that range kind of becomes nullified by the fact that you're both using equally terrifying and devastating weapons. It makes the combat really, really short, but it doesn't really provide you with an advantage like you would normally think because of the high big number that you see on the battle card. So these averages with the range modifiers are what you really need to look at. Let's take a look at how lasers differ from beams. First of all, beams have 100% accuracy at all ranges, and that's important to know. That is a common trait of all beam weapons. They will always be 100% accurate at all ranges. They tend to have a lower damage per second, but because of that 100% accuracy, they're predictably effective at all ranges, and they're a good weapon for a variety of uses. Lasers have a really high damage at medium range compared to a lot of other weapons. They're very effective at medium range. They're less effective at long and short range, but they're not so ineffective at long and short range as kinetic weapons. Remember, kinetic weapons, really bad at long range, pretty good at medium range, and devastating at short range. Missiles are kind of the opposite of kinetics. They're very terrifying at long range. They're pretty decent at medium range as well, and they're still mildly effective at short range, but much less so. The problem with missiles is that they're very easy to counter. And so this is where the game of rock, paper, scissors gets played. When you're dealing with weapons of the same tier, basically the way that it works is that laser weapons will counter kinetic weapons. Laser weapons, energy weapons, are more effective at long and medium range than kinetic weapons, and when you can force the kinetic player to engage at long and medium range, you'll have a significant advantage in the early phases of combat. So that significant advantage in the early phases of combat hopefully allows you to destroy some of the enemy ships. And if you destroy the enemy ships with kinetics, they never get to close to short range and deal their massive amounts of damage, and therefore you can win the engagement. However, the problem with laser weapons is that while they're effective at long and medium range, they are extremely susceptible to being taken out by missiles. So, lasers counter kinetic weapons, and missiles counter energy weapons. These missiles will be able to do significantly more damage at long and medium range than lasers and beams of the same tier. If you get into higher tiers, then it gets a little bit more complicated and the matchups get a little bit trickier to predict. But when you're talking tier for tier, equal weapons from the same tier, energy weapons from one tier will be countered by missiles of the same tier. These missiles will completely decimate because of their higher long and medium range stats. And so they will outdamage the laser and beam weapons significantly, and they will win the engagement similarly to how kinetics do. They'll just deal so much more damage in the early phases that they don't receive enough damage in return in the later phases. Ships are getting blown up. It's a good time had by the person with missiles. Now, why aren't missiles then a counter to kinetics? Because kinetics are terrible at long range. They're horrible at medium range compared to most other weapons, and they're only good at short range. Well, the reason that kinetics are the counter to missiles, and this is only true if they're from the same tier. When you get missiles of higher tier, or when you get more missiles than the opponent has kinetics, it gets a little bit tricky to make the predictions. But when equal tier weapons are engaging, anytime you equip a ship with a kinetic weapon, a slug, it also comes equipped with a flak cannon. And you'll see some stats over to the left of the screen for flak cannons. Now these flak cannons will deal 120 damage to missiles and 3 damage to squadrons. They have this aura effect around the ship, and anything that breaches this bubble and engages the ship will be fired upon by the flak cannons. Flak cannons have a cooldown of about half a second, and most things can be fired on about twice before they reach their target. So any incoming missile that breaches the bubble aura of flak defense will be fired on 2 times before it gets to the ship. If the flak cannon misses with both shots, the missile will hit the ship and deal its damage, minus any defensive stats from modules that the ship has, for example, hull plating or shields. However, if the flak cannons hit the missile, they'll deal damage to the missile, and if they do enough damage to destroy the missile will do 0 damage. Flak cannons, to the best of my knowledge, have an 80% chance to hit with each shot fired. That means that in order for a missile to pass without being hit one time, it would have to pass a 20% roll, basically. 80% chance to hit, 20% chance to miss, and then it would have to do that again. And when you stack those numbers, you basically have a 4% chance of passing flak defenses. So missile for missile, flak cannon for flak cannon, each missile that enters that flak zone will be shot at twice, at a minimum. And if there are more flak cannons, it may even receive more shots than that. So the odds are even lower than 4%. If you have more missiles coming into a flak zone than flak cannons, you'll have slightly better odds of getting one or more missiles past the flak defenses. So outnumbering flak defenses is one way to kind of counter them. Having higher tier missiles is another way. So let's look at missiles again real quick. If we look, each missile salvo in this particular case only has 60 health. Okay, 60 health means that only one shot, only one hit from the flak cannons is required to destroy this missile. Now, you have to go pretty high up the missile tier before you get to a point where missile health is greater than 120. If you get to that point, if you get to a point where your missile health is greater than 120, then the flak defenses will then have to hit that missile with bolt shots. And that increases your odds of passing the flak defenses quite significantly. It actually goes from about a 4% chance of breaching the flak defenses to about a 36% chance of breaching the flak defenses, because 2 hits are required in order to drop the missile. So it is possible in certain circumstances to overcome flak defenses with higher tier missiles or with significantly more missiles than the opponent has flak defenses on their ship. If they can only have 1 or 2 flak defense guns and you're playing with a Riftborn ship that has 4 missiles firing every turn, there's a very good chance that a good portion of those missiles are going to breach the flak defense every once in a while. They may not do it every single time, but they will more consistently do it. The problem is, if we're just facing off in the early game and I have 1 missile and they have 1 flak defense cannon, I have a very slim chance of getting missiles through, even with my 100% accuracy. And so the problem is, as I close, it becomes even less and less likely that I'm going to hit the opponent with missiles if they're the only weapon I'm using. And once the combat goes long enough, it will almost inevitably, against a kinetic equipped ship, move to short range, at which point they will destroy you with their guns. So they use their guns to shoot your missiles down, they close, and then they shoot you up. And this is the rock, paper, scissors mechanic of the game. Kinetic weapons counter, to some extent, missile weapons. Laser weapons counter kinetic weapons, and missiles counter laser and energy weapons. There are a few other types of weapons in the game, and I won't get into covering those today. Maybe in an advanced video on the Nose to Nose we'll talk about those, but this is just the basics that I wanted to cover today. So keep this in mind when you're choosing a loadout, and most importantly when you're choosing battle tactics. Another thing that I want to show you that's really neat with this menu real quick is you can mix weapons. So let's say that I go with 1 missile and 1 flak cannon. You can see that my damage per second is averaged between the two. And so this was the 28 damage per second, this was the 2. Those are added together to make up the 30. And you can see I'm pretty effective at all ranges with this loadout. The problem with this loadout and with these numbers is this missile damage is very deceptive, because the missile damage is almost completely countered by kinetics. And so as long as the opponent that I'm facing is not using kinetic weapons, these are pretty good numbers for figuring out roughly how much damage you're going to do to the opponent. But as soon as they have kinetic weapons, all bets are off, and it's going to look a lot more like this. And that's no good. So even these numbers are a little bit iffy when you're trying to figure out what kind of damage you're going to do. And furthermore, let's say that my opponent is not using kinetic weapons. Well, if that's the case, then there's really no need for me to have this module. I would probably be better off with 2 missile modules. I mean, the damage that I'm going to do and the quickness that I'm going to drop their ships with laser weapons is way, way, way higher if I just equipped more missiles. And even in a situation where I'm facing a ship with missiles, if I have more missiles than they have, I'm going to be dealing more damage to them faster than they're dealing it to me, and so I'd still be on top. Now, if we both have the same amount of missiles, then it's just a coin flip anyways. But when the weapons differ, having the counter to your opponent's weapon type is critical. The other thing that's really, really important that is not stressed enough are these battle tactics. And you start with a small number of battle tactics. I highly recommend getting in here and mixing these up and messing with them. I don't think that the ones you start with are really the best ones in most cases. I think by far the best battle tactic that you can start with is probably barrage fire. Barrage fire is a really good long-range battle tactic. Plus 2% damage at long range per enemy ship on ships is not bad. But the better reason to take this one is there's no penalty for using it at long range. Power to shields is fine, but it's a 10% reduction to your own damage, which is not very good. You don't want to be reducing your damage. Even if the enemy has energy weapons and you're using shields, I think it's still iffy. I think it would still be better to just use the missiles with barrage fire. But if you have shields and you have missiles and you're facing energy weapons, this would be the best tactic to use. If you're facing anything else, barrage fire is probably better if you're using missiles or energy weapons. Energy weapons are going to be best served typically at long or medium range. If you're using kinetic weapons, Turtle is probably your best bet. 70% bonus on critical hit on weapon modules. This would be okay if you were using a mix of different types of weapons, but typically speaking in the early game you're only going to be using this center lane, and so the center lane is really the only one you're looking at the beginning of the game. You have a long range tactic, long range tactic, long range tactic, short range here, and a medium range here, and that's all you start with. What I would typically do, if it were me, is I would switch to barrage fire for my long range tactic. I would leave Turtle as my short range tactic, and I would maybe throw in post-op analysis for my medium range tactic. And this gives me options when I'm engaging in combat. I want to have options. It gets a little bit more complicated, obviously, when you get your command points higher and you're dealing with more lanes. It's always best to equip the weapons for the lane. So if you are using a short range tactic, you need to have weapons that are effective at short range. If you never use missiles with Turtle, it's just a bad idea. Like, do not use weapons that are not suitable for the tactic you have. It doesn't matter about the little bonus at the bottom. The bonuses at the bottom are just an extra. But the most important thing is to make sure that your weapons are being used at their effective ranges. Typically that means long range for beams and lasers. Medium range is also okay, especially for laser weapons, but it's probably in most situations still better to be at long range, especially against kinetic players, because we'll talk about that. I'll show you why, but it's better if you're playing kinetic players to always engage them at long range. That's kind of the rule of thumb. And the reason for that is force them to engage at their crappy long range where they can't do any damage to you, and get as much free damage in as you possibly can. That's essentially why you always engage kinetic equipped ships at long range. Even if it's not your ideal range because you got lasers decked out or something, you're still going to be doing way more damage to them in that first phase of combat than they do to you, and it's going to allow you to potentially remove some of their ships or damage them enough that they very quickly fall once they become more effective at medium and short range. But yeah, this is the battle tactics that I would start the game with if I were you. I think it gives you the best variety, and it also gives you the best tactics that you start with, in my opinion, because the other ones don't really make a lot of sense at this point in the game. Something like Get Lucky makes a lot more sense once you get to the middle part of the game, where you can engage from these other lanes and you can utilize the critical hit damage on laser and beam weapons a little bit more efficiently. Some of the higher tier kinetic weapons also have crit chance, but the base weapons do not, and so you don't get any benefit from using kinetic weapons with this tactic. So it's just not a good tactic for a short range tactic for kinetics. But yeah, again, just to show you, this is why you always engage them at long range. They're just doing such pitiful damage at long range. It doesn't matter how bad your damage is with any other weapon. It's not as bad as what a kinetic weapon is, and so you'll always come out on top in that engagement. So long range is really the preferred combat for most weapons in the game. Short range is the preferred combat for kinetic weapons, really, and that's about it. So keep that in mind. Okay, I think that's going to wrap it up for this video today. I may continue playing the game for a few minutes, so if you'd like to watch the next couple of turns, I'll probably play a few more turns of this Vaulter game, and then I'll bid you guys adieu. But I hope that that helped some people get a little bit better understanding of the basics of tier 1 weapons and combat. I have another video that I've been working on that I'm going to be releasing. It's kind of a slideshow presentation that breaks down the tier 1 engagement and does it in a little bit more visual way. So look forward to maybe checking that out in the future. And with that, we're going to go ahead and continue our game a couple turns and just show people how I like to open up my games. So we're on turn 3, and I mean, this is just really cool. I really like this tactic. I think it's kind of silly, but it makes my life a lot easier. Alright, so we've got our Xeno Industrial Infrastructure building. We want to queue that up right away. I'm not sure exactly what my next one's going to be. I have several different options. We'll talk about those in a moment as to which one I may or may not pick and why. Be the first to possess 20 star system improvements. What's the reward for that? 75 Jadonics. That's actually not a bad reward. Especially if we can find some Jadonics, but even if we don't, I believe, yeah, Sisters of Mercy have a Jadonics population booster, and that's actually not a terrible one. The Sisters of Mercy provide 2 approval, and so popping a Jadonics booster when you have a large number of these populations can actually get you back into a higher tier of happiness, which can greatly increase your system output, but also boost you into the empire-wide bonuses to dust and science. So this could be critical at some point in the game, just to get us those next couple points we need to get like an extra 15% dust and 15% science. It's not a bad one to have in your back pocket for those types of situations, so it's something we should probably pursue. That means that we need to focus quite heavily on industry, getting industry down and more industry down and more industry down and more industry down to get buildings pumped out faster and faster so that we can be the first one to have 20 system improvements. That's nothing important, so let's go back to the technology screen and let's talk about what our options are then. So the first option is, since we know we have a Hyperium and we want to start mining it as quickly as possible, we could go for Plasma Metallurgy. Plasma Metallurgy will give us a building, and that building will give us approximately 12 industry once we get it built. We're going to have about 4 population, so 3 or 4 population, 4 industry per pop on that planet as long as we keep them there. That's going to be anywhere from 12 to 16, and it'll grow a little bit more over time, but that's about it. We're going to maybe get a total of about 30 industry from this building end game, just because of the population of the system will benefit not as much as the primary planet we're on, but the main reason we would want to grab this early is to get the Hyperium being mined as fast as possible. Other options. Desert planets. There are 3 anomalies on these planets. Currently, maybe a 4th. So with 3 anomalies, once our hero becomes the governor of this, her primary ability, and this is one of the few times I can't. Can I just inspect her? She won't let me inspect her from there. That's silly. Okay. There we go. Her primary ability is plus 10 industry per anomaly on colonized planets. And so if I were to have colonized a planet, say like this one, where I have 2 anomalies right from the get-go already uncovered, I might consider putting the hero down here instead of sending her out to scout, because that's 20 industry from turn 1 that she's going to be providing to the system, which is just really, really good. Because we started on a planet that didn't have any anomalies, that's not even really an option. It's not really a consideration for me. If I don't have a habitable planet with 1 or 2 anomalies, I'm almost never going to put my hero down on the planet to start with. If I do have anomalies, and particularly like 2 of them for sure on the system and the planet that I want to inhabit, I would strongly consider just dropping her down to get that 20 industry from turn 1. But in this situation, that's not the case. Now, by getting the tech for these unlocked relatively quickly, we could unlock quite a bit of industry. Also, Xeno-Industrial Infrastructure was finished researching, so we're going to move it up in the queue. And this would also increase the industry by another 10 for each planet. So this would potentially be 10 for the planet and 20 for each of these to colonize this. That's 30 industry just for colonizing this planet. Definitely something that we would want to consider. And then another 20 for this one, Cyberflora, and the planet itself would give me another 20 industry as long as my hero's on this system. So, kind of looking ahead, desert colonies are right here. So we might grab like this and then this. So something like that. That's going to take 3 turns and 16 turns, and I think 16 turns is too long to wait just to colonize that planet. The other thing that we could do is we could grab galactic commodities and atmospheric filtration And I like this opening a lot too because it provides us access to the marketplace so we can sell things. The other thing that it does is it provides me access to this, which you can get down relatively early and will produce just a little bit more of the two most important resources that we have to deal with. Vaulters are just completely gorged themselves on titanium and hyperium throughout the game, and so do not underestimate any ability, any little trickle of income that you can possibly get of these resources, because you will find a way to consume it if you're playing right. There's just too many good things to spend them on. I think for sure though, because we do have a Hyperium deposit right away, we're going to go ahead and pick this up as our second tech, and then we'll kind of think about it a little more before we make any more long-term decisions. Okay. So we've discovered the Academy. We've discovered a endless planet in the Pollux system. If you just mouse over the planet like this, you can see the base outputs, which are pretty fantastic. 3 food, 20 industry to start with, 4 dust, 5 science, and 4 influence. Most of the endless planets that are identified will produce some amount of influence, which is pretty cool if you can pick those up pretty quickly. This system is very hot, so it's very industry rich. Not a lot of resources here. Some transvine, which is not all that exciting, but just because it's an endless planet, it's always something that you might consider, and especially a 5-planet system with an endless planet, it's a pretty good deal. Arid is also a pretty easy research, and it's actually one on the way to desert, which we already need, so this might be a good place to consider our second settle. In fact, I'm really considering sending the Argosy over there for our second settle. Very strongly. Alright, our hero and our scout ship have made it over here. We've got most of our probes back, so we'll grab all of these and see what we found. Sense. Our hero has already leveled up. There are only 2 abilities at the beginning of the game that I would strongly consider for your hero, and that is Resource Scrounger and Farming Logistics. These 2 abilities are the best abilities at the beginning of the game. They're good for getting systems going. Now, in our situation, where we've started with both types of strategics, and we're getting the text for them early, so we're going to be mining them quickly, I would put a little bit less value on Resource Scrounger. But here's the thing. We need so much of those resources, so much of it. It just gets ridiculous. It's such a big bottleneck. If you're playing the Vaulters the way that 4X Alchemist and I have kind of come to the conclusion might be the best way to play them, it basically boils down to you're constantly trying to rush your colonization, and the cost of rushing your colonization is extremely large, both in dust and in strategics, and specifically in equal amounts of titanium and hyperium. However, when you do that, when you're constantly rushing that, you're limiting your ability to use those tier 1s for other important things. And so if you want to do both the important things and rush your colonies, you're going to have an inordinate amount of income, like way more than anybody else in the game. If you're just going to colonize quickly, but you're going to kind of pass up on some of the other things, then it doesn't matter as much. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put 2 points in this early. I need the income. And you think, well, we were going to be getting 3 every turn. That's pretty good. And it is really good at the beginning of the game. But it's just not enough. And you'll see if we continue this game for very long why it's not enough. The food would be nice. It would help our system grow a little faster. And so let's talk about why I didn't choose the food, even though we already have the resources we need. This is why I didn't choose the food. We are going to fill this planet up very quickly. Even with the crappy amount of food that we're bringing in right now, this planet's going to cap out. And all the extra food that we have is not going to help us fill these up until we get the techs to unlock them, and we may not be able to get them very quickly. I mean, we've already looked at the deserts pretty far down the list, ashes in tier 2 as well. It's not going to be quick. And so having extra food on this system is not really that helpful. Now, if the system we had colonized at the beginning of the game were more like this one, where we could just jump to planet and just keep getting our population rolling, then that food tech probably would have been the better choice. But in this situation, the problem is if we had been on this system, we have 0 income of the 2 strategics, and so that strategic resource collection becomes even more critical, even in a situation where food would be more beneficial. A system like this with strategics on them, that would be probably the only scenario where I would maybe lean towards the food over the strategic collection. And we're going to get the food anyways. It's going to happen. We're just not going to get it at the very beginning of the game. And definitely not in this situation. Alright, so we've gotten her figured out. And just checking a couple of anomalies, making sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, we have one more anomaly to search in this system, and then I think we may head down to here, because we know there's 3, and that'll put us at 10. I'm pretty sure. We should have 6, we'll have 7, and then the 3 down there will give us the 10, and we should get that reward. As long as somebody else doesn't do it sooner. Okay, moving on. System improvements. Okay, we've got our Hyperium extraction online. We're gonna have to pick another technology, and I think I know which one we're gonna go with because we know kind of where we may want to settle. Pollux was looking really enticing. But let's see what else we've discovered. This reward, I always look at this one. So this is a tricky one. I'm not sure what the best way to roll this is. So the way that this works, Sentinel will always give you a reward of one of the 2 strategics. You'll either get Hyperium or you'll get Titanium as the potential reward for defensive buildings. It's not really a priority, and it's not something we're going to focus on in the early game typically, but it's pretty easy to get done. Seekers. This is a little bit more realistic. You start with the technology for 1 science building already unlocked, so you either get 4 systems and build that in each system, or you get another building unlocked and you build 2 different science buildings and 2 systems to get this reward. The problem is 100 Eden Incense, as nice as that is, unless it's a population booster, or unless you already have income of it and you want to use it for system development, it's just not as good of a reward. It's basically going to boil down to how much does 100 Eden Incense net me on the market in dust? Because that's probably what I'm going to end up using it for. Maybe use it for trade, but This one is definitely the one that's easier and faster to achieve of the two, but the reward for this is almost always better. And so I'm leaning more and more towards making this my reward. The other reason that I like this objective better for the vaulters, the way that I play them, is I tend to play kind of a turtle strategy where I use my military and my manpower once I hit the mid game to kind of snowball into a science victory. And I've talked about that in some of my other videos. But there's a really cool power of the vaulters where they actually convert a percentage of their manpower into science, and so building lots of defensive buildings with manpower can actually net you a substantial amount of science in the end game. And that's kind of what I plan on doing, so I'm going to go ahead and take that reward. Not that we'll probably finish it. Oh look, we found Ariga. Where's it at? Over here in Atlas. Get a nice look at our planet. Alright. Well, that's good. Found another minor faction. The Argosy is ready. Let's go ahead and get her out, and let's take a look here. So, right now, if we were to magically end up on another system, and we had 973 dust and 14 of each strategic, we could technically lay down a brand new colony on turn 5. That is not realistic in almost any game I've ever seen, but it is not unrealistic to believe that we could do it in fewer than 12 turns. In fact, the sooner we get it done, the better, in my opinion. If we can afford any way to get this done more quickly, we should probably take it and get our second colony up and running as quickly as possible. The real question is, where do we want to put it? And this is why the little trick that I used with the probes at the beginning of the game was so critical. It gives me a lot of information about where to send the Argosy this turn. Way more information than I could get just from using this ship and moving around the map. And so I have quite a few options. This is an interesting option because of so many easily colonizable systems. A couple of anomalies, one of them bad. Not a horrible one though. That's not a bad one at all. 2 strategic or 2 luxury resources, neither of which are population boosters though. We can go ahead and get that. And before we jet, we should probably send this over this way and see if we can't uncover something. Yeah, it's not gonna make it very far, but alright, so we're on our way to finishing that first deed. Whenever you find the Ariga, whenever it becomes uncovered, and I think at some point, even if you haven't discovered it, it becomes discovered for you. I can't remember on what turn that happens. But basically you get a -5 penalty to approval and +20 on systems, +20 science on systems for 10 turns. This can actually be really, really powerful in the mid to late game. Like if you have 5 systems down, that's an extra 100 science for 10 turns. That's 1,000 science over 10 turns. So it's not always ideal to find Ariga too soon, but it doesn't hurt you. It's beneficial no matter what. So we also found this planet. So let's take a look at what we got here. Kairos is an interesting planet. It has no food and it has no industry, but it has a massive amount of science and influence. It's also in a system. See, anytime you have a subterranean, kind of like we talked about before, there's a very good chance that this subterranean is a strategic deposit and probably titanium. So this tiny boreal planet might actually be another average deposit of titanium and hyperium with a very, very nice endless planet that we could colonize a little bit later in the game. The problem is the tiny desert's not going to be all that useful, especially with another huge, ugly polar tempest. Terrible. We're definitely going to have to prioritize getting barren, but because it's a large barren, it should have a fair number. Max population is only 4. This is a tricky one. The resources make me consider it even over Pollux. Pollux definitely does not have any strategics, and atmospheric curiosity is not very good. But the total population and the industry of this system could be quite good. Well, decision time. What am I going to prioritize more? Potential strategics or potential population and industry? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go with the strategics. And the reason I'm going to go with the strategics is because I feel like it could slingshot us into a faster third colony, and Pollux could potentially be our third colony, assuming that somebody else isn't like right here and grabs it, or pirates don't land on it. This will be very unlucky if I don't end up getting titanium down here, but I think this is the right call. I think getting your strategics are the most critical part of the early game of a Vaulter player, and you need to prioritize planets and systems with potential strategic deposits over other ones. And anytime you get a system with strategic deposits and an endless planet, that's not a bad thing. Let's make sure we've talked to all these guys that we can. If I haven't talked to him yet. Anybody else? We want to start getting those points accrued. Alright. Go ahead and pick a technology. Alright, so what are we going to do here? The arid planet isn't as critical as it was since we're going to the boreal world, and we don't need to rush into that. I think what we do want to rush into is unlocking our basic system development, and so I'm going to go ahead and grab both of the ones that I had told you about earlier. Galactic Commodities gives us access to the market where we can sell resources to make more dust or buy strategics potentially, and X Atmospheric Filtration gives us access to the Ash Planet, some approval buildings, but most importantly the filter barges, which is again just another resource, just another way to get a little bit more of our strategics that are so critical. The nice thing about the way we're doing this as well is we're going to head over here, grab these, and then we can quickly come over here and grab the few curiosities that are on this system. with our scout. We're quickly approaching the turn at which we can move our hero. She's got 3 more turns of cooldown. Let's see, is there anything else we can do? Okay, so we see that the blue player is over here. We don't know who the blue player is yet. A rival outpost. Doesn't give me any other information. That was another system that looks like it had both resources. Hyperion and a second. Alright. So we're at 10 turns until we can get a free colonization. We need 800 dust and 12 of each resource. We're about halfway on the dust, and we have already collected enough of the strategics to colonize early as of next turn. So next turn these are going to go down a tick and ours are going to go up a tick, and that's going to be good for us. Getting the 800 dust is going to be tricky. We're going to get the galactic commodities exchange in 1 turn, so we may be able to sell a few things to try to get it a little bit quicker, but we're not going to be able to get to it this turn, which means we'll just put you to sleep. And I don't think there's anything else we can really do. We're just kind of waiting. So we'll go ahead and end another turn. Found the Mavros. They've already made contact with someone else, it looks like. Finished the Xeno-industrial infrastructure, and we finished this. We're moving on to the second technology that I chose. That will unlock the potential for system development. Let's go ahead and move our ship over here, and let's search this out. We got 1, 2, 3. Alright, so what do we find? Loot. This is what I was talking about. We were able to gain a 2nd level, and I'm going to go ahead and put a 2nd point into this to make this a full 1 every single turn. We also found mutated flora, Eden incense, and we received our reward of 75 titanium for the 10 curiosities that we just searched. We have 1 probe left. Let's go ahead and send it down this lane and uncover whatever's at the end here. And then let's move our ship this direction and get this other curiosity, and we're gonna have to offload her onto one of these 2 systems here pretty soon. We might even consider this one. Well, no, there's no reason to put her over here. It would be better to put her over here, I think. Alright, the Argosy 727 and 11 of each resource. We could definitely get a little bit closer. So that's going to be 100 and another 100. That's going to be about 600. We don't really need these for anything else. We might as well sell them. I'm a little hesitant to use my strategics for dust because I would prefer to use them for other things. So let's wait 1 turn, and then the price on this will come down a little bit, and we should be able to afford, if it's somewhere in the 600 range. make it? We did not make it. Ah, that's frustrating. Found a neutron star. Okay, can we settle? Can we colonize? 646. I'm gonna say yes, we can make that happen. So if we sell all 10 of this, and we sell all 10 of that, and then we sell a very small number of these. What did we need? 646? You know what? I only need 9 Hyperium. So I'm going to sell the Hyperium first because the titanium is more valuable to me. So I need 9 so I can sell 8. 57. Is that enough? Yes! It was enough. Just barely. Okay. We're gonna go ahead and settle. Get these down. So we're looking at barren and desert in order to expand the population on this system. The barren's actually going to be better, although it's -8 per planet over here, where it's only going to be -5 approval per planet or per population over here. Alright, and this will be the last turn, and I'm going to go ahead and end the video for today. I hope you guys have learned a little bit about some strategies that I think through during my openings, and particularly that piece on combat that I've been trying to get out for a while. I'm going to do a more thorough piece again with the spreadsheets and the PowerPoint presentation and the graphs that I've put together, but I need to go through it a couple more times. I just keep finding more information out, so I want to make sure that I get that polished up for you before I release it as a real video. But I've been having a lot of fun. And I'm sorry I haven't been as active recording lately, but maybe that's going to change in the next couple of weeks. I'll get a bunch of videos out again. We'll finish up this turn, and it'll be a good place to stop. Oh, click the right button there. Okay. Titanium? Please. Ah, yes. An abundant deposit even. Oh, so this was definitely, in my opinion, the right choice. Okay. In one turn, we're going to get the X atmospheric filtration. Now, here's what's going to happen at the end of that, at the end of this turn. So on turn 11, we're going to come to the economy screen, and we're going to use titanium as our first system development upgrade. That's going to allow us to put an extra 40 industry and 40 food on every colony that we start up. And this was the reason that I wanted to go so hard on strategics. I have 2 colonies down by turn 10, 100% up and running. That's pretty quick. But by turn 12, I'm going to be able to have my System 1 upgrade for both of those. And the titanium amount per colony is pretty hefty. It's 30 titanium per colony. That is the reason why I did not want to spend any of my titanium selling it in order to make money earlier. I want to use as much of this titanium as possible to get these tier 1 developments down. Now, in a situation where titanium is not my most abundant resource. I've played a few games where I've tried to force using titanium when it wasn't really what I had on hand, and it just kind of crippled my system development. If you have a massive amount of Hyperium, a massive income of Hyperium, and you just don't have a lot of titanium, you will not have enough to use it for your tier 1 development. You might want to consider using Hyperium for your tier 1 development, and maybe coming back to titanium for tier 2 if it becomes more available later on, or using one of the other luxury resources for your tier 1. Jade Onyx is a great substitute. It's probably still the best one in the game if you can get it. Some of the other ones are okay. You know, most of these ones are okay. This one, the science one's kind of iffy, but it's still pretty good. If it's what you have, it's what you should use. So keep that in mind. But yeah, this is going to be a really, really good opening, and I may continue playing this game for, 30 to 50 turns. Just see how it goes and see if we kind of reveal some more strategies, some more things that are pretty cool that I want to share with you guys. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. That wraps up for today. Again, this has been The Nose Plays, and you guys all have a great day.